Hello everyone! As I was sitting here, thinking of ways and angles to get people up to speed on what they might have missed with the story of the Shadowlands. Ultimately, the best course of action, it seems to be doing the story of the Jailer. The most beloved character that they've ever introduced in World of Warcraft. We're gonna talk about his history, his motives as far as we know it, his plans and how that echoed throughout the story of Warcraft. Now it's anyone's guess if or when the events from the Shadowlands will actually make an impact on the overall story again. But it is still part of the lore, it is still part of the story. So let's get into it.
Beyond the veil lies darkness, where every soul has its place.
The Jailer, as well as the other Eternal Ones. The ones that we know being the Primus, the Winter Queen, the Archon and the Sire. They were all created within Zereth Mortis. This is the domain created by the First Ones to act as their workshop, to create these eternal beings, to create more afterlives for the Shadowlands, potentially create the Warcraft universe as a whole. The First Ones themselves, they're still quite a mystery, and a lot of information, it's either biased or speculative. They are seemingly responsible for the creation of the universe, if not the ordering of it. With their design, there also comes a pattern. A purpose, if you will, a predestined plan. Now it might seem insane to have a force out there that's able to predict and potentially manipulate our stories, our heroes and villains to set them on a certain path. But we have seen really clear moments in game in which those designs of the First Ones actually came to be.
The sacred words tell the Waystones would respond only to certain living mortals, the ones destined to save the realms of death. The Moors. Let the prophecy be fulfilled. If it is the will of the First Ones, this Waystone will open to you, mortal. The sacred words spoke of your coming. Blessed be the First Ones.
They were able to predict that at some point in time, the Mawwalkers, they were going to show up in the Shadowlands to stop Zovaal's plans, as they placed stones at precise locations, which they prophesied that the Mawwalkers could use to escape and move the troops around. You might argue that these stones were just randomly dropped there in multiple places like a failsafe. But then one has to wonder, why do so in a place like the Maw, a place where no soul is supposed to escape? Why drop it in a place like Zereth Mortis, where no one is supposed to go? The fates have been read. People knew that we were going to come. Better yet, perhaps we should also ask ourselves that if the First Ones were able to predict that we were going to need these Waystones to stand up against Zovaal, then why exactly did they let Zovaal happen to begin with? It's a good question. Speaking of, what exactly happened with Zovaal, since this video is on his story after all? Well, he didn't start out as the Jailer imprisoned within the Maw. His original design was to perform the role of the Arbiter. He judged the souls that arrive in the Shadowlands. In an instant, he would know the entirety of their existence. And time after time, do you know what he saw? He saw fragile beings left to the fickle whims of fate. Their world, their kin. Whether they were wise or simple, hale or sickly, these things were forced upon them. From the moment they drew their first breath until they exhaled their last, the choice was never theirs.
From our first breath to our last, every decision is made for us. Then, the afterlife decides what eternity we must endure. We can't even choose who we...
And when their lives ended, it was his duty to decide their soul's fate for all of eternity, sending them off to whatever domain that they belonged.
You have betrayed your duty as Arbiter, and shall be bound forevermore. Your madness has threatened the cycle of life and death entire.
You could have sought another way, brother. Imagine what we could have accomplished together.
Why, Zovaal? What drove you to this end? You preserve that which is doomed. A cosmos divided will not survive. What is to come?
And along the way, he saw something that shook him to his core. that made him believe that the designs of his makers, the designs of the first ones, were flawed. They were just preserving that which was ultimately doomed, and the cosmos divided would not survive what he saw. What is to come? Now you might ask, what exactly did the jailers see? What is coming, and why did he not just openly discuss this with the other Eternal Ones? Or has he perhaps done so, and did they just never tell us? Who knows? Again, those are some really good questions. Regardless, Zovaal decides to take action, and strikes out at his fellow Eternal Ones to take their sigils, open up a path to Zereth Mortis to get to the sepulchre of the First Ones. In there, he would find the power to rewrite the rules of the universe. And the others, they didn't take kindly to that. Under the leadership of the Primus, they managed to overpower Zovaal, strip him of his Arbiter powers, which they used to make a new, more robotic Arbiter, while Zovaal was locked away within the Maw. Upon his body, they placed Domination Magic, a creation of the Primus to contain their brother. Over time, Zovaal managed to turn these chains into a weapon, and he became not just a prisoner, but also the Lord of the Maw. Hell-bent on breaking free and fulfilling his quest, he got to work, and from there on out, he pretty much caused the story of Warcraft to happen, manipulating events so that it would all come together in his liberation and reaching that sepulchre. That might seem like an impossible task. After all, who could predict years and years and years of events? Well, it seems like they've given him similar powers of prediction as they did with the first ones. A good example that comes from the Sylvanas novel. As he's working together on his team, he makes some predictions. He predicts some events that are to come. A fiery darkness will return, which is the Burning Legion attacking Azeroth, but a prediction vague enough to apply to multiple things. Then he says, "You must step out of the shadows and lead," which were the words that Vol'jin spoke to Sylvanas. Impressive that he was able to foresee Vol'jin's death. But then again, assassinations, they're not hard to plan, and the words, they were whispered to Vol'jin by Muzela. But then he goes on to say, "A blade will pierce the heart of the world, and you shall hold the blood from that wound and sense its power." He is talking about the ending of Legion, in which the Dark Titan Sargeras stabbed Azeroth, wounded the world greatly, eventually have the world race for all that delicious, powerful Azerite. He's very specific in his prediction as well. Sargeras did not slice the world in half, did not destroy it, even though he tried. He really wanted to destroy it, but he only managed to stab it and was pulled back just in time. A prediction like that, all the little events that had to happen, the timing to precisely have that sword stuck in the planet, that, in my opinion, is way too specific to just be a random stab in the dark, or like comparable to the Whispers of Il'gynoth, something that you could apply to many different situations. So, how does one defeat an enemy that's able to predict the future like that? Again, a really good question.
This place is of no consequence. The sepulchre will soon be within reach. Mossworn, come.
Either way, seemingly with the power to predict events that have not yet come to pass, our boy Zovaal, he goes to work, recruiting allies to move his pieces across the board. Most prominently, there was Sire Denethrius and his creation, the Dreadlords, as we know them. They will play a critical role with infiltrating different cosmic domains and cause a whole bunch of trouble. For example, they caused havoc in the domain of order by stoking the Mad Titan's fear of the Void. The fear that pushed Sargeras into forming his demonic Burning Legion and scour the universe of its dark corruption. Meaning that any story which originally had the Burning Legion at its source has now added the Jailer to its tail end. Then, as Sargeras was raging at how long it took for his fallen demons to wake in the twisting nether, it was again the Dreadlords that told him that they could forge a resurrection engine that would make his armies rise again in an instant. All they required was the necessary fuel, the soul of a world infused with the power of death. So it was that Sargeras enslaved the world soul Argus, and the Dreadlords went to work.
A world soul twisted by death. A maw with which to crush the Arbiter. And now, it shall take this vessel. Argus will be eternal,
Normally, the Shadowlands is reserved for mortal souls, and beings like the Titans, they're supposed to go elsewhere. However, pumping it full of death magics, it made it so that millennia later, when we showed up and defeated Argus, its soul actually shot off into the Shadowlands. That big influx of a titanic soul, it was way too much for the Arbiter to handle. It broke down, and then all the souls instantly flowed down into the maw, which fueled the jailer's plans. The Nephrius was not his only ally either, far from it. We've seen Helya, Muzala, Devils, the Valkyr, and of course Sylvanas Windrunner. By the time that she threw herself from the top of Icecrown after claiming vengeance upon Arthas, she ended up in the maw, in the jailer's domain, and suffered eternal torment. It was by his command that she was given a moment to rest, a moment in which they talked with each other. He wanted her to join his side, but not as a slave or a servant. He wanted her as a partner, or at least that's the story he told her. The motivation used to join his side, it's a little bit mixed, and it seems like he just threw whatever he could at her to make her join his side. For example, part of it was the choice of either working with him or simply suffering more torment. Part of it was agreeing to the idea that the designs of the first ones, that the bullshit. And part of it, a big part of it, was that the sorting of the afterlife, it was done indiscriminately and without taking into account the bonds we forged in life. Meaning that someone like Windrunner, even if she wasn't sorted into the maw, she could still be sorted into an afterlife away from the rest of her departed family. She could be away from her sisters, from her brother Lirov, and a lot of people wondered where someone like Duratan, Draka's mate and Thrall's father was hanging out. This seems to be playing into that idea, the separation of the Shadowlands being a reason to tear it all down.
We're breaking a system that has always been flawed and remaking it into one that is just.
All in all, the Sylvanas novel, it does its best to sell the idea of Sylvanas working together with the jailer, with the one responsible for the Lich King. It would have been great if they actually explained that motivation also in the game. Now even the jailer's motivations, going against his creator's design, the idea of no choice in life, they're not without merit. One could wonder if the jailer was actually right, but ultimately, as Enduin puts it best, his motives, they might have been right, but his methods certainly weren't.
Look around you! At what and who you've joined. What makes you believe you're not just a weapon to achieve his ends?
Which is perhaps why it's so odd that after all is said and done, after all of the jailer's plans came together and, of course, ultimately failed, after we closed the book on his story and supposedly like 20 years of storytelling of Warcraft, that ultimately nothing in the Shadowlands or the grand design has really changed. We see Pelagos replacing the Broken Arbiter, with a mindset of souls that need a chance at redemption, rather than be sent off straight into the maw, which is definitely nice, but it doesn't touch on the whole pattern of the first ones, nor the unfairness of life, or the separation of loved ones, or being put to work in the afterlife. As a final note, here's some information from Firim. It's a broker that has done extensive research into Zerov Mortis and the first ones. Though the jailer's been defeated, and the Shadowlands made whole again, I find myself unable to celebrate these victories, for I have studied the inner workings of the Sepulchre, seen the powers with which the jailer sought to remake reality, and these observations fill me with a fear that shakes the very core of my being. It is clear to me now that there must be a Zerv for each force of the cosmos, and within them an inner sanctum akin to the Sepulchre. And if that is true, then these sanctums must be connected on some fundamental level. A connection that the jailer sought to exploit. What he began in the Sepulchre was meant to cascade outwards from one Zerov to the next, until all were dominated by his power. The heart of the Shadowlands, acting as a doorway to the heart of each cosmic force in turn, one after another, bound to his will. But if his scheme was thwarted, then why is my mind so ill at ease? Because I've seen how fragile the pattern is. How delicate the scales that keep the six forces in balance. And if the jailer, in his act of malevolence, left behind but the most imperceptible of cracks in the pattern, then I fear what is tiny now will only grow, until the balance itself is prone to be shattered by another force, applying relentless pressure. I pray that the first ones anticipated such an eventuality, that they would leave measures in place to preserve their grand design. Unless their design was never meant to endure. And that That is the possibility that haunts me.
Do you see the patterns? The fractals? I'm so close to understanding. Oh, hello.
Everything, it just kind of goes back the way that we found it. We closed the door behind us, and now we're going to focus on dragons again, which at the end of the day, it might just be for the best. For those curious on what happened to characters like Sylvanas, Tyrande, Anduin, or just what events have been changed by the Shadowlands going forward, I'll cover that in a separate video. So, yeah. Hope you enjoyed the story of Zovaal in a nutshell. Obviously, not the most liked character, but hey, it is part of the lore. For now, thank you very much for watching, everybody. Say that you liked the video, by all means leave a like, perhaps even subscribe to the channel. And until next time, see ya!